Why is health technology so complex? Healthcare happens at the intersection between clients and providers. It is at this intersection where the real magical moments in healthcare happen, when a provider and a client can look directly at each other and really discuss what's going on, where empathy is at the heart of this interaction between the client and the provider. And the key to health technology is that it needs to support this empathetic interaction. In supporting this empathetic relationship between the client and the provider, technology ought to seek to be an enabler for both parties. For the provider, it should enable greater efficiency, which will allow them to provide better healthcare, for example, by providing support to better quality of care. For the client, it ought to support greater empowerment, increasing their engagement in their own healthcare. This is at the core of what technology ought to provide through interoperability, and technology can create, taking the information and create these efficiency gains and create the empowerment for the client. Unfortunately, often it's the case that it's the opposite to this. Technology that's been introduced actually creates inefficiency for healthcare providers, and those inefficiencies contribute to the commoditization of the relationship between patients and providers, which leads to things such as provider burnout and a lot of other issues that we see in our healthcare system today. Moreover, this bad implementation of technology also leads to fear at worst or apathy at best with the client interacting with their healthcare systems. So quite often, technology has not actually enabled the empathy relationship, and certainly not led to that utopian vision of what healthcare could have been with all of this technology enablement. So we have a lot of electronic medical record systems and care delivery systems embedded within our healthcare sector providers, but we are going to require additional technology to get those efficiency gains that I discussed earlier. From a survey that the United States Hospital Association undertook that surveyed ICT leadership and healthcare leadership, we get a very good idea about what the gap is. Some highlights are 75% of health system leadership believe digital innovation is essential to meeting long-term goals and establishing competitive advantage. Moreover, 70% of IT leaders believe their department has insufficient resources to support digital innovation. Also, it takes on average 23 months to get from identifying a need within a health service provider to implementing the solution. Finally, 54% of those surveyed believe that time put into digital innovation is spent inefficiently. This shows the gap between the technology that these healthcare providers have and the kind of technology that they want. Ultimately, there's a real problem with the interoperability between these technologies and the infrastructure required to support this interoperability. From here, we'll take a look at what the interoperability landscape looks like and where the technology is going. At the heart of this technology complexity is not actually the technology itself, because that's not complex. It's the way that the technology works with other technologies that makes it complex. It's getting useful, accurate information that can be utilized by workflows that is at the key to making this technology work for organizations. Therefore, it's the interoperability of the technologies with each other and the wider ecosystem that becomes the problem to solve. It can seem quite complex to start off with, but if we utilize our diagram to better explain these interoperability technologies, we can break them into three basic groupings as follows: transition of care, provider side, and client side technologies. The first type of interoperability would be where you see it utilized in the transition of care scenario. For example, a client moving from one care setting to another, such as a client coming from a general practitioner clinic to a hospital, or from one hospital to another. These are data sharing networks, health information exchanges, or what's now commonly used as a health information network. Essentially, all of these technologies allow data to follow the client through their care journey along their pathway. Generally speaking, these transitions of care interoperability technologies are broken into three main categories: direct exchange, the ability to send and receive secure information electronically between care providers to support coordinated care; query-based exchange, the ability for providers to find and or request information on a client from another provider; and often used for unplanned care events. And the third type, person-mediated exchange, the ability for clients to aggregate and control the use of their own health information amongst providers. The next tranche of technologies we could call the provider-side technologies. And these are broken into a number of separate categories. The first of these is what are commonly known as interface engines. Some examples include things like Orion, CorePoint, or Ensemble. They are mostly technologies that sit on the inside of a provider network and are generally used to glue bits and pieces of other information systems together within the provider's information environment. Therefore not really designed to send information out to other organisations, mostly utilised within one provider information environment. The next bunch of technologies are vendor-specific programs that sit alongside the care system that the provider may be using. These are proprietary APIs that allow systems to connect directly with the system that they support. Thus, they generally bypass the interface engines. Some examples are the large electronic health record vendors such as Cerner, Epic, Allscripts. And finally, many providers are now starting to utilize API management layers such as MuleSoft, Jitterbit, Apigee. They generally stand up the layer and make it available to any provider that wants to use it. This is great because it allows the health system to move forward by actually implementing an API layer. However, often the implementation is inconsistent and the management can become quite an overhead. On the client side, there are a number of interesting technologies. These can be both direct to client or just client facing. Some examples are things like Human API or Apple Health Kit. These technologies go about pulling information out of other information systems across the healthcare sector and providing a platform for other innovators to build small applications upon. These technologies are venturing out into also integrating with personal devices and wearables and other consumer devices. In some situations, providers are actually prescribing their clients to use a particular type of wearable or access their information through their own portal. Adoption is seen to increase for the client when it is actually prescribed to them by their provider. These technologies allow providers to disseminate information and for clients to be empowered by being able to access their information.
So the way forward is for organisations to invest more in interoperability rather than technology itself. All strategic areas of focus for the organisation can be an opportunity to bring greater interoperability and integration to the organisation. Taking a hard look at all factors may, in the long run, prove less costly than developing point-to-point, one-off solutions that may temporarily address a regulatory requirement but may not fully enable the organisation's full interoperability strategy. Even organisations leading the industry in interoperability are aware that there are many technology disruptors. These range from consumer technology companies to startups. They could all potentially push interoperability to the tipping point. Understanding that these disruptors are also vying for a spot in this future will be critical, as they could be in front of the industry in the future. Organisations that are not yet thinking about interoperability strategies may find themselves lagging not only in data exchange but also in other key strategic areas such as value-based care. In the final analysis, it is the interoperability, not the technology, that will make the difference.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found this presentation informative and interesting. Please have a look at some of our other videos. You may find them interesting as well. Please feel free to share this amongst like-minded individuals and your friends. If you have any further queries or comments, please don't hesitate to have a look at www.norvan.net. Thanks again.